The baby's chest rose and fell in shallow, uneven gasps. Her tiny fists trembled. Her lips were turning blue. Ivy couldn't cry, she was choking, drowning in silence inside her crib. In the kitchen, Lena washed dishes with quiet focus, her soft hum nothing more than a memory in her mind. She couldn't hear the water, couldn't hear the world. She had always lived in silence. And so, she didn't hear her baby struggling to breathe. But someone else did. Echo's ears twitched. The black Labrador lay near the nursery, calm on the outside, trained to be alert on the inside. Something wasn't right. The air shifted. The rhythm of the baby's breathing, the vibration, the energy, it changed. Echo stood. 1 second passed. Then he dashed down the hall. Lena jumped as he stormed into the kitchen, barking loud and sharp, something he rarely did. His body collided with her leg, almost knocking her sideways. A dish shattered on the floor. "What is it?" she signed quickly, confused. Echo barked again, eyes wide. Then he ran. Back and forth. Back and forth. She hesitated. But then she saw his eyes, and everything changed. She dropped the towel and followed. The moment she opened the nursery door, her heart collapsed. Ivy's face was pale. Her body limp. No sound, no scream. Only fear. Lena rushed forward, scooping her daughter into her arms, her hands shaking. She patted Ivy's back, tried everything she knew. Her eyes blurred with tears. Echo stood like a statue beside the crib, rigid, alert, unwavering. Then, a gasp. A tiny cough. A cry. Lena sank to the floor, Ivy pressed against her chest, tears falling like rain. She looked up at Echo. He had saved her baby's life. She couldn't hear her baby cry, but someone else did. And that changed everything. Everyone would soon know Echo as a hero, but no one knew he'd once been abandoned for being too emotional. This wasn't just a rescue, it was his redemption. Lena had never known the sound of a baby's cry. It was something she had never experienced herself, yet it was the thing that haunted her every night since she learned she was pregnant. She would lie in bed, eyes closed, the soft hum of silence surrounding her, and imagine what it would sound like, the wail of a newborn echoing through the house. But no matter how hard she tried, it was always silent in her mind. A soundless world. The absence of sound had always been a part of Lena. It wasn't just the lack of hearing, it was the way the world felt different. People saw her as if there was something missing in her, but it wasn't. It was just quiet. The world didn't always understand that silence didn't mean loneliness. But for Lena, silence was often the only language she knew. There had been moments, of course, when the silence had felt suffocating, those early years when she lived alone, after her mother had passed, and her father, distant, was rarely around. She had been a child, too young to understand the real weight of the silence, but old enough to sense the tension that filled the empty spaces around her. Her school years were filled with awkward silences, classmates who didn't understand her, the constant feeling of being different. She had learned to withdraw, to stay in the quiet and observe, but there was a deep ache inside her that she didn't fully understand at the time. And then there was Echo. The day Lena had walked into the shelter, she hadn't expected to find anything that would change her world. But there he was, a black Labrador, his eyes wide and searching, his fur ruffled and matted from months of neglect. It was a silent plea in his gaze, one that mirrored her own. Lena had always been an observer of people, but with Echo, it was different. He didn't need her to speak, he didn't expect anything from her other than a connection. And that was the moment she knew, he would be hers. At first, it hadn't been easy. Echo was anxious, unsure. He had been returned twice already, rejected by 2 families who couldn't understand him. They thought he was too emotional. But that didn't scare Lena, it resonated with her. The world had always said she was too much of something. Too sensitive. Too quiet. Too misunderstood. In a strange way, she saw herself in Echo. And as she signed to him for the first time, something clicked. Echo's eyes softened, and he walked over, pressing his head into her palm, as if understanding that this was the beginning of something important. But the fears that came with motherhood were overwhelming. Lena would lie in bed at night, her hands resting on her belly, imagining the life that would soon be in her arms, and the endless what-ifs that haunted her thoughts. What if she couldn't hear her baby cry? What if she missed something important, a warning, a call for help? One evening, as Lena sat on the couch, Echo by her side, she whispered aloud to the empty room, "What if I can't hear her cry?" It wasn't just a question, it was a reflection of every worry she had buried deep inside her. A fear that became more real with every passing day. Echo, as if sensing her distress, padded over and placed his head in her lap. He didn't need to bark or jump. It was the way he rested, with his warm body against hers, that reassured her. His eyes locked with hers, the soft glisten of understanding in them. He had been with her through the quietest moments of her life, and now he would be there when everything changed. As Lena's pregnancy progressed, her world became quieter. She lived in her own bubble, surrounded by a deep silence, but also by a growing sense of dread. The fear of missing something. The fear of not being able to be the mother she dreamed of being. No matter how hard she tried to prepare herself, there was an underlying feeling that she wasn't ready. That she couldn't be ready without the ability to hear the world as others did. She had always feared that silence could isolate her from others, and the fear that it might isolate her from her own child was unbearable. But then, something unexpected happened. One morning, as Lena rested on the couch with her hands on her belly, she had a strange, almost chilling thought. What if in the dead of night, something went wrong? What if her baby stopped breathing and Lena would never know? The thought crept in, uninvited and heavy, and it stuck with her. It felt like a premonition, a warning she couldn't ignore. Echo, as if reading her thoughts, padded closer to her, resting his head on her lap, looking up at her with those knowing eyes. His warm body felt like a presence, as though he had always been meant to be by her side. In the stillness of the moment, Lena felt a deep fear and a deep comfort, a conflict between her worries and the sense of calm that Echo brought to her. It was a strange thing to experience. The quiet had always been her companion, but now, it felt like a looming silence that might swallow her whole if she couldn't find a way to overcome it. But that was the moment she made a promise to herself: Echo would always be her ears. He would be the protector she needed, the one who would help her hear what she could not. And somehow, that promise filled her with a sense of hope. The world outside was filled with uncertainty, but Echo had always been there, and somehow, she knew he always would be. But even as Lena made that promise to herself, a voice inside her wondered, would Echo be enough? The shelter was filled with the sounds of barking dogs, but it was Echo's silence that stood out. He wasn't like the others, the playful puppies wagging their tails or the excitable young dogs jumping against their cages. No, Echo was quiet. His dark brown eyes seemed to reflect a sadness that no one could quite understand. His coat was thick and unruly, not the glossy fur of the other dogs, but something that looked like it had been neglected for too long. Lena had come to the shelter in search of a dog who could help her navigate the world of silence. She needed a companion who would understand her, who would be her bridge between the silence she had always known and the world outside. When she had walked past the cages, she had stopped at Echo's, drawn by the calmness that seemed to radiate from him. He wasn't desperate for attention like the other dogs. He was still, like he was waiting for someone, or something, to recognize him. The shelter worker, a woman with tired eyes, had warned Lena about Echo. "He's been returned twice," she said. "People say he's too emotional. He gets too attached. It's like he needs a connection to survive. Some find that overwhelming." Lena didn't see it that way. To her, Echo's sensitivity felt familiar. It felt like a reflection of her own life. She had spent so many years feeling misunderstood, feeling like an outsider in a world that didn't fully comprehend her silence. Echo's quiet demeanor spoke to something deep within her, the unspoken bond between two souls who knew what it meant to be overlooked. The first night Echo came home with Lena was a quiet one. There were no loud noises, no overwhelming sounds. Just the soft rustle of Echo's paws on the floor as he followed Lena around the house, his eyes never leaving her. She could feel the weight of his gaze, a silent question in his eyes. "Will you accept me?" It wasn't easy at first. Echo had his moments of anxiety, pacing the floors late at night, his body tense, as if he were waiting for something. Lena understood that kind of fear. She, too, had spent nights alone in silence, waiting for the world to change. But slowly things began to shift. Lena noticed that Echo would follow her everywhere. Into the kitchen, to the bathroom, to the bedroom. He would rest his head at her feet, offering silent comfort. And when Lena spoke, even though he couldn't hear the words, he would watch her hands move, his head tilting in understanding. But there was one moment, a few weeks into their time together, that would change everything. Lena had been sitting at the kitchen table, writing in her journal, when Echo suddenly darted to the window, barking furiously. His ears were perked up, his tail stiff, and his eyes wide with alarm. Lena felt a chill run through her. Echo was never like this. He was calm, gentle, but now there was an edge to him. She stood up, walking over to the window, peering out into the darkness. Nothing. The street was empty. No cars, no people. Just the quiet hum of the world outside. Lena turned back to Echo, who was now sitting, still as a statue, staring at her. His body was tense, but his eyes held something else, a quiet, steady understanding, as though he had seen something she couldn't. As though he knew that danger could be just around the corner, even when everything seemed calm. It was in that moment that Lena understood Echo wasn't just a dog. He was more than that. He was a protector, a guardian. But even with that understanding, Lena wasn't ready for what was coming next. A few days later, Lena had a troubling thought. She had always feared that her silence would leave her vulnerable, that she wouldn't be able to hear a cry for help or the subtle warning of an impending disaster. She had spent so many years bracing herself for the possibility that she might miss something, that she couldn't help but wonder, what if something happens to the baby? What if I can't hear her cry? The thought weighed heavily on her. It was something she couldn't shake, a feeling of impending dread that had settled deep in her heart. She couldn't explain it, but it was there, lurking in the corners of her mind. And that's when she realized Echo would be her ears. But would he always be enough? The thought came in waves. She thought of Echo's silent vigilance, his ever-watchful eyes, and his deep connection to her. He had been there through the hardest moments of her life, from her isolation in a world that didn't understand her, to the quiet comfort he brought into her home. He had become her rock. But could he be the one to help her in the most crucial moments? Echo had already proven himself time and time again, but Lena wasn't sure if that would be enough when it really counted. Could she trust her life, and the life of her baby, to a dog? Could Echo sense a danger she couldn't hear, or would they both be left to face the silence together? The doubts lingered, but in the quiet of her home, with Echo by her side, Lena made a decision. She would learn to trust him. Because no matter how silent her world was, Echo had always been the one to break through the silence. He would be her strength, and together, they would face whatever came next. The first few months with Echo were challenging, but every day, Lena saw glimpses of the bond growing stronger between them. Echo had already learned to understand her body language, the subtle shifts in her posture that conveyed more than words ever could. But now, as the baby grew inside her, Echo's attentiveness shifted from Lena's needs to the new life growing in her belly. Lena would sit on the couch, her hands gently cradling her growing belly, and Echo would lay by her feet, his head resting on her lap. She had always imagined herself as a mother, but the reality of it was still sinking in. The baby was still a few months away from being born, but Lena had already started to wonder how she would manage when the time came. How would she take care of a newborn without hearing her cries, without knowing when she needed help? But Echo was always there, his watchful eyes never leaving her. He could sense her anxiety before she even realized it herself. The dog's bond with her had become something that transcended the usual pet owner dynamic. He wasn't just her companion, he was her protector, her guide. When the baby was born, everything changed. The hospital room was filled with a bustle of activity, but Lena was alone in her silent world. She couldn't hear the soft cries of the baby, the beeping machines, or the soft murmurs of the nurses. But she didn't need to. Echo was there, sitting at her side as the doctors placed her baby girl into her arms. His eyes were soft, and Lena could feel his energy shift as he looked at the tiny infant. The baby, Emily, was a delicate little thing, her tiny hands and feet curled into fists, her face scrunched up in confusion. But Echo was already bonding with her, sensing her vulnerability and instinctively understanding that she needed care. As the days went on, Lena began to notice how Echo's actions seemed to mirror the way she responded to Emily's needs. He would gently nudge Emily when she stirred in her crib, as if to alert Lena to the baby's discomfort. At first, Lena wasn't sure if Echo could truly understand the baby's needs. Could he know when Emily was hungry or scared, just as he knew when Lena was upset? But as the weeks passed, Lena's doubts began to fade. There was something special about the way Echo was always by Emily's side. His ears would prick up when the baby cried, and though Lena couldn't hear her daughter's wails, Echo's sharp gaze was enough to reassure her that she wasn't alone. He had become her ears in a world that would otherwise be silent. Echo's training had always been rooted in his instinct to protect and serve, but with Emily, it felt as though he was being retrained for a different purpose, not just to care for Lena, but to care for the child who was now part of their world. The dog watched over Emily with a level of attentiveness that was nothing short of extraordinary. He would sit beside her crib, his tail still, his eyes locked on her every movement. Lena often found herself wondering how Echo knew when to act. How did he sense when Emily was about to cry, even before Lena saw the signs? One afternoon, as Lena was doing laundry, she felt a cold chill creep down her spine. There was an unsettling quiet in the house, a strange stillness that made her heart race. She looked over at Echo, who was sitting on the couch, staring intently at the door to the nursery. He was completely still, his body rigid with tension. Lena hesitated for a moment. Was something wrong? Before she could even move toward the nursery, Echo sprang into action. His bark was sharp, urgent, as if something in his instincts had triggered him. Lena's heart skipped a beat. She rushed to the room, but as soon as she reached the doorway, she saw what Echo had sensed. Emily was choking. The baby's face was pale, her tiny chest heaving as she struggled for breath. The panic in Lena's chest was immediate. She couldn't hear the sound of Emily's distress, but the sight of her daughter's struggling form was enough to fill her with terror. Echo was already at her side, his paws gently nudging Emily's chest, trying to get her to stop gasping. He barked again, louder this time, his eyes desperate as he watched Lena frantically scoop Emily up into her arms. The moment Lena had the baby in her arms, Echo sat back on his haunches, watching them both with a look that seemed almost proud. His job, his mission was clear. Lena rushed to the phone, dialing the emergency number with trembling hands. Echo, still by her side, remained calm, his steady presence grounding Lena in the midst of the crisis. She could hear the emergency operator on the other end, but everything felt muffled, distant. The calmness in Echo's demeanor was what helped Lena hold herself together. It wasn't just his training. It wasn't just his bond with her. It was something deeper, something more primal. Echo knew when danger was near, and he reacted without hesitation. The ambulance arrived in what felt like a lifetime. When they got to the hospital, doctors reassured Lena that Emily was stable, but they also explained how close they had come to a much worse outcome. 2 more minutes, the doctor said with a grave expression. She might not have made it. As Lena sat in the hospital room, holding her daughter tightly in her arms, she couldn't help but think of Echo. The dog had been more than just a companion. He had been a lifesaver, her protector in a world that often felt too loud, too chaotic, and too dangerous. Later, when the chaos of the emergency had settled and Lena was alone in the room with Echo, she knelt beside him, her hands trembling as she ran them over his fur. He had saved her daughter. He had saved them both. "Thank you," Lena whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Echo responded by nuzzling her hand, his calm, steady presence offering her the comfort she had never known she needed. The days that followed the scare with Emily were a blur for Lena. The hospital visit had left her exhausted, both physically and emotionally. She had never imagined that motherhood would come with such intense fear. Each night, as she lay beside Emily's crib, she couldn't shake the lingering anxiety. Her heart raced whenever she thought about the possibility of missing something, the faintest sound, the quietest cry. Echo was always there, though, his presence as steady as ever. He'd lie beside the crib, his eyes never straying from Emily's face, watching over her with the silent dedication that only he could understand. But no matter how much Echo tried to reassure her, the fear still lingered in Lena's chest. One afternoon, as she sat on the couch, nursing Emily in the silence of their home, Lena allowed herself to think about what had happened. The idea of losing Emily, of not being able to hear her cry if something went wrong, weighed heavily on her heart. The reality of being a deaf mother with a newborn child had set in, and it wasn't as easy as she had hoped it would be. "I'm scared," she admitted to Echo, her voice barely a whisper. "What if I can't hear her? What if I miss something important?" Echo, as always, responded with a nudge of his head, resting it on her knee. He looked up at her with his soft, understanding eyes, as though he knew exactly what she was feeling. Lena reached down to scratch behind his ears, and he let out a soft, contented sigh. It was moments like this, when words weren't needed, that made her feel less alone. But her fear was still there. Every time Emily stirred in her crib, Lena found herself holding her breath. Was her daughter awake because she was hungry? Or was she in distress? Could Echo tell the difference between the two? Lena didn't have the answers, but she knew one thing for sure: Echo would always be there, by her side, watching out for Emily when she couldn't. And that brought her a sense of peace, even if it was just a fleeting moment. One evening, as Lena was preparing dinner in the kitchen, she heard the faintest sound, a soft whimper. At first, she thought it was her imagination. But the sound came again, this time a little louder. She froze. Was Emily crying? Lena couldn't tell. Her heart skipped a beat as she rushed toward the nursery, her mind racing with all the possible reasons for her daughter's distress. Echo was already there, standing by the door, his body rigid and alert. He was staring at the crib, his tail stiff behind him. Lena's anxiety spiked as she rushed into the room and saw Emily lying in her crib, her tiny fists balled up, her face flushed with discomfort. The baby wasn't crying, but there was something wrong. Lena's heart pounded in her chest as she picked up Emily, holding her close. The baby whimpered softly, her face scrunched up in confusion. Echo watched them both, his eyes focused on Emily with an intensity that sent a shiver down Lena's spine. It was as if the dog knew something was wrong before she did. Lena held her daughter, rocking her gently, trying to soothe her. "Shoo, baby, it's okay," she whispered, though she wasn't sure what was causing Emily's distress. Suddenly, it hit Lena, the fear. The overwhelming, suffocating fear that she would miss something important, that she wouldn't be able to hear her baby's cries in time. It was a fear that lingered deep in her chest, a constant knot that tightened with every passing moment. But then, just as quickly as it had appeared, the feeling began to dissipate. Echo was beside them, sitting calmly in the corner of the room, his eyes locked on the baby with a quiet, reassuring gaze. His presence was enough to ground Lena, to remind her that she wasn't alone. As she rocked Emily gently, Lena whispered a soft promise to her daughter, her voice thick with emotion. "I won't let anything happen to you. I'll always be here. I'll always hear you, even if I can't hear the world." For the first time in a long while, Lena felt a sense of calm settle over her. She couldn't hear everything. She couldn't hear Emily's cries or the soft noises of the world around her. But what she had always had, was Echo. And that was enough. Echo's presence had become a lifeline, a bridge between Lena's silent world and the world of her child. The dog had a way of sensing things, of knowing when Emily needed something before Lena could even register it herself. His instincts were sharp, and his loyalty was unwavering. As Lena looked down at Emily, her daughter now settled against her chest, she realized that she didn't need to hear her baby's every sound. She just needed to trust in Echo. Together, they could face anything. The bond between Lena, Echo, and Emily was growing stronger every day. But the fear would never completely fade. It was a fear that would stay with her for as long as she was a mother. But as long as Echo was by her side, Lena knew that she could handle whatever came their way. For the first time, Lena felt like a mother. A deaf mother, yes, but a mother all the same, with her loyal dog by her side, protecting her family in ways words could never describe. Weeks passed, and winter blanketed their little town in quiet stillness. Inside their warm home, life was beginning to find a rhythm. Lena still moved with quiet anxiety, but now, she was never alone in that fear. Echo was always near, as if he had taken it upon himself to absorb what Lena couldn't hear. He had grown more than just protective, he had become intuitive. He began recognizing the smallest gestures, the way Emily curled her fist when she was hungry, or how she kicked her legs restlessly when she needed to be held. Echo caught every signal, often before Lena did. One snowy morning, as pale sunlight spilled across the wooden floors, Lena was folding tiny clothes on the couch. Emily lay on a soft blanket nearby, babbling softly. Echo was beside her, his black fur shining, one paw stretched protectively across the edge of the blanket. Lena looked over, smiling as she saw Echo gently nudge a small toy toward Emily. The baby squealed with delight, waving her arms. Echo responded by wagging his tail and lowering his head in a playful bow, just enough to make her giggle. Lena paused. That laugh. She had never heard it, and never would, but she could feel it. She sat down beside them, brushing her fingers through Echo's fur. "You're doing more than I ever could," she signed gently. Echo didn't need to see the sign to understand. He leaned against her, warm and still. That night, something remarkable happened. Lena had just put Emily down to sleep. The house was dark, save for a soft amber glow from a small lamp in the hallway. She stood at the sink, washing bottles, when she felt it, a sharp tug at the hem of her sweater. His tail was stiff. His eyes were wide, alert. His nose twitched. He barked once, sharp and short. Lena froze. She dried her hands quickly and signed, "What is it?" Echo bolted down the hallway, skidding around the corner. Lena followed in a rush, her heart hammering. She reached the nursery just as Echo stood with both front paws against the crib. Emily was stirring, eyes closed, arms flailing slightly. Lena picked her up and instantly noticed how warm she was. Her skin was hot. Lena didn't hesitate. She grabbed a thermometer, 102.3. Fever. A familiar panic tightened her chest. She held Emily close, rocking her, while Echo sat quietly, watching every movement, ears twitching. Lena kissed Emily's forehead and whispered, "Thank you," though the words weren't meant for the baby. They were for Echo. After the fever broke later that night, Lena couldn't sleep. She sat beside Echo, one hand resting on his back. A memory returned, something she hadn't thought about in months. It was during her pregnancy. She had been sitting on the floor one night, crying silently. She was terrified. Terrified of being a single mother. Terrified of not hearing her child cry. She had signed the words slowly, hopelessly. What if I can't protect her? What if I can't hear her cry? And that night, Echo had walked up, sat beside her, and rested his head in her lap. That memory broke something in her now. She looked at him, tears forming again. "You've always known, haven't you?" Echo just blinked calmly. But she knew the answer. In the weeks that followed, Echo's instincts continued to sharpen. One afternoon, Lena watched as he responded to Emily's cries not just with concern, but action. Emily had been wailing in her crib while Lena was in the laundry room. She didn't hear the cry, but Echo did. Instead of barking, he ran to Lena, took her sleeve gently in his mouth and tugged. This time, he didn't wait. He led her. He ran to the nursery and placed himself between Lena and the crib, pointing with his nose until she picked Emily up. Lena's eyes welled with tears. It wasn't a fluke. Echo had started to act as a messenger, a bridge between mother and daughter. A living, breathing conduit of love and urgency. He was no longer just watching. He was translating. One evening, Lena sat at her laptop, writing a post on a small forum for deaf parents. Her fingers moved slowly as she typed. "My daughter has a dog. But more than that, she has a guardian. His name is Echo. And because of him, I'm learning how to be a mother." The post went unnoticed by most. But one woman replied hours later, "I never thought of having a dog. I'm deaf too. This gives me hope." Lena stared at the screen, tears blurring her vision. She looked down at Echo, who was curled up at her feet. She smiled. "You're not just saving us, Echo," she whispered. "You're going to save more." That night, something subtle but significant happened. Echo had started sleeping closer to Emily's crib, not just beside it, but underneath it, tail wrapped tight, head alert. as if he was waiting, as if he knew that something was coming, something no one else could predict. The sun had finally returned after a week of snow. Golden light danced on the frosted windows, casting soft patterns across the nursery walls. Inside the house, everything seemed right. The kind of quiet perfection that feels too delicate to last. Lena sat on the floor, her legs stretched out, arms open as Emily tried her best to crawl into them. The baby giggled, wobbling with determination. Echo lay a few feet away, head on his paws, watching with the calm patience of a guardian. He didn't wag his tail much anymore, he simply watched. Observed. Understood. Lena scooped Emily up and twirled her gently. Her face was glowing. These were the moments she had been afraid she'd miss. But she hadn't. Because of Echo. She kissed Emily's forehead, then turned to Echo, signing, "Thank you. You are her ears. You are mine." Echo blinked slowly in response. Later that day, Lena dressed Emily in a tiny pink sweater, the one with the white buttons she'd knitted during her pregnancy. They were heading out to the park. It wasn't far, just across the street, but it felt like a new chapter. They hadn't been out much since Emily was born. As Lena secured Emily into her stroller, Echo paced beside them, alert but calm. He always walked a step ahead or behind, not out of excitement, but duty. At the park, Lena sat on a bench, watching as Emily squirmed happily on a picnic blanket. Echo lay beside her, allowing Emily to tug at his ears and pat his face with clumsy baby hands. A few mothers nearby laughed and talked. One pointed toward Echo and said, "Is he a therapy dog?" Lena smiled and signed, "He's more than that. He's my ears. He's our protector." The woman nodded, understanding in her eyes. As the wind picked up slightly, Lena noticed something strange. Echo's ears twitched. Not the usual, lazy flicks of a dog enjoying the breeze, but sharp movements. He lifted his head and stared across the park, body stiffening. A jogger passed by. A kid on a bike zoomed close to the blanket, then circled away. Echo didn't relax. He sat up fully now, placing himself directly between Emily and the path. Lena followed his gaze but saw nothing alarming. Still, she trusted him. She gathered Emily in her arms and decided it was time to head home. Echo didn't walk this time, he escorted. Every few steps, he looked back, checking on them. Back home, Lena felt a strange chill she couldn't explain. That night, as she placed Emily in her crib and turned off the light, Echo didn't lie at the door like he normally did. He sat at the edge of the crib, watching, waiting. Lena knelt beside him and whispered, "What is it, Echo?" He didn't move. She placed her hand gently on his head, but his eyes remained focused on the crib. On Emily. On the silent rise and fall of her tiny chest. At midnight, a soft snow began to fall again. The world outside hushed itself once more. Inside the house, Lena was asleep on the couch, her book still open in her lap. In the nursery, Echo did not sleep. He paced once, then lay down, then stood again. There was no noise, no light, just silence. And yet, something felt wrong. Echo lifted his head sharply. He heard it. It wasn't loud. Just the tiniest shift in breath. Emily stirred. Echo stood, sniffed the air, then placed one paw on the crib's edge. The baby coughed. A whimper followed. Then silence. Echo stiffened. He barked once. But from the living room, Lena jerked awake. It was nothing. Just a tickle in Emily's throat. She was fine. Still, Lena stayed up for hours, rocking her gently, watching her sleep, with Echo sitting quietly nearby. The next morning, Lena wrote in her journal, "I don't know why I'm scared. Everything's fine. Echo's just being protective. But it feels like he knows something. And I don't." She closed the book slowly. Outside, the world glittered in fresh snow. Inside it was warm, peaceful. Too peaceful. It started like any other day. A kettle whistled softly in the kitchen. Sunlight warmed the floorboards. Emily babbled from her crib while Echo dozed near the nursery door, his head resting lazily between his paws. Lena stood by the sink, scrubbing a bottle. She hummed quietly, not out of tune, just unaware. She couldn't hear the kettle, or the birds, or her baby. But Echo could. And what he heard that morning changed everything. A sound, a small, choked gasp, pierced the nursery. Echo's head jerked up, ears standing, muscles tight. Then he heard it again. Not a cry. Not a cough. Something worse. A struggle. He rushed into the room, claws clicking against the hardwood floor. Emily was kicking, tiny arms flailing. Her lips slightly blue. No sound. No scream. Just silence. And terror. Echo barked. Loud, sharp, desperate. From the kitchen, Lena paused. She didn't react immediately. Echo barked all the time. At delivery trucks. At squirrels. But this was different. He didn't stop. He charged out of the nursery, grabbed the hem of Lena's pants with his teeth, tugging urgently. She turned, confused. Echo! He let go, ran back toward the nursery, then darted back again, barking, nudging, pleading. Lena dropped the bottle into the sink. Her heartbeat kicked into panic. Something in Echo's face, his eyes, unlocked something primal in her. She followed him. And what she saw when she entered the room made her blood freeze. Emily was barely moving. Her mouth slightly open. Her face blotchy and red, then pale. Lena rushed forward, snatched her up, trying to remember everything she had read about infant emergencies. Was it choking? Was it a seizure? What do I do? Echo stood beside her, his body vibrating with urgency, as if willing her to act faster. Lena flipped Emily over, supporting her head and back, delivering a few small but firm pats between her shoulders. Emily coughed, but nothing came. No. No, Lena whispered, tears streaking down her cheeks. She turned her over again. Echo barked, so loudly it startled her, and she realized it was his way of saying, hurry. She grabbed her coat with one hand, baby in the other, and bolted outside. Snow crunched under her boots as she ran to the car. Echo jumped in without being told. The nearest clinic was 12 minutes away. She drove like a storm, one hand gripping the steering wheel, the other clutching Emily's tiny body. Her mind screamed all the things she couldn't hear. What if she's not breathing? What if I'm too late? Echo stood on the back seat, nose inches from Emily, watching her like a lifeline. At the stoplight, Lena screamed through her tears, please, please, please. Emily coughed again. A wet sound. But it was something. Echo leaned forward and licked her hand. Lena didn't stop for traffic. She ran a red light, swerved into the clinic parking lot, nearly crashing into the curb. Inside the building, everything blurred. Nurses ran. A doctor took Emily from her arms. Lena collapsed into a chair, breathless. Shaking. Deaf to the chaos, but not to the look on Echo's face. He sat beside her, watching the hallway, waiting. Minutes passed like hours. Then the doctor returned, cradling Emily in his arms. She was crying, crying. And Lena had never seen anything more beautiful in her life. She held her, sobbing silently into her daughter's soft hair. The doctor leaned in and said, slowly, making sure she could read his lips, if you had come 2 minutes later, she would not have made it. Lena's heart shattered and swelled all at once. 2 minutes. Echo had given them 2 minutes. She looked down at him. He sat, chest rising and falling, eyes locked on Emily, tail still. Lena dropped to her knees, pulled him into her arms, and hugged him like she never had before. He was more than a dog. He was her ears. He was her daughter's guardian. He was the reason she still had her baby in her arms. The hospital room was quiet now. Lena sat beside the small crib where Emily lay, her chest rising and falling, finally at peace. A heart monitor beeped steadily in the background, a sound Lena couldn't hear, but Echo could. He hadn't taken his eyes off Emily since they'd arrived. She reached down, brushing Echo's head gently. You saved her, she whispered, reading the words on her own lips as she mouthed them. You saved my baby. Echo leaned into her touch. His eyes, those soft, deep brown eyes, were tired, but calm. As if he already knew. As if this was the moment he had been waiting for, his whole life. Lena pulled out her phone, typed a quick message to her mother, then another to the vet who had introduced her to Echo all those months ago. She paused on his name in her contacts list, Dr. Hemsworth. She hadn't spoken to him since the day she signed the adoption papers. Back then, Echo had been labeled too emotional for service work. Too sensitive. Too reactive. Too easily attached. He had failed his training. Twice. She had seen it in the vet's eyes when she came to pick him up. They all thought she was making a mistake. But now, this black Labrador who had been cast aside by so many had just rewritten his story with a single act of instinct, love, and loyalty. She reached into her bag and pulled out the folder she'd kept tucked away, Echo's file. She had kept it all this time, partly out of guilt, partly because it reminded her that both of them were misunderstood. She flipped through it again. There was Echo, male, 4 years old. Labrador Retriever. Hearing assist dog training incomplete. Rejected due to emotional reactivity and inability to detach from handler. Not recommended for first-time deaf owner. She had read that sentence over and over the night before she adopted him. Not recommended. But something had drawn her to him that day. The moment they met, he had walked past the other handlers and rested his head on her lap. No hesitation. No sniffing. Just stillness. She remembered the first week she brought him home. He followed her everywhere. The bathroom, the hallway, the backyard. He seemed to memorize her every move. And then, the moment that returned to her now like a thunderclap. Her third night alone during the pregnancy. She had sat on the floor in the dark, crying quietly, hands resting on her belly. I won't hear her, she had sobbed. What if she cries and I don't know? What if I fail her? And Echo had come close, gently licked her hand, and pressed his head against her belly. It wasn't just comfort. It was promise. That memory played behind her eyes now, and it shattered her all over again. She turned to look at Echo. You knew even then, didn't you? She whispered. He didn't move. Just looked at her, tail slowly brushing the floor. A nurse entered the room, smiling. She's stable now, she said, enunciating carefully. You can take her home in the morning. She's a strong one. Lena nodded. She knew that already. She glanced back at the crib. Emily was sleeping now, tiny hand curled beside her face. But it wasn't over. Not for Lena. That night, she opened her laptop and wrote a post on her blog. A page she had created during her pregnancy, meant to track her journey into motherhood as a deaf parent. She had never expected this to be part of the journey. She began typing. Today, my daughter almost died. She didn't cry. She couldn't. She was choking. I was in the kitchen, humming. I didn't hear her struggle. I didn't hear her gasps. But someone else did. His name is Echo. He's a black Labrador. He failed his service dog training. They said he was too emotional. Too attached. But he didn't fail me. Today he barked. He barked like his life depended on it, because hers did. He ran between us, pulled at my clothes, begged me to follow. I didn't understand until I saw my baby's face. We made it to the hospital just in time. They said, 2 more minutes and she would have been gone. But she isn't. Because Echo was listening. And now I understand what love really means. She attached a photo of Echo sitting beside Emily's crib. Within minutes, comments started pouring in. From deaf parents. From people with hearing dogs. From those who had been told they weren't qualified to raise children with a disability. From mothers. And fathers. And trainers who had once labeled dogs like Echo as unfit. The post went viral by morning. That day, a local reporter called. Then another from a national news site. They wanted to know more. About Echo. About Lena. About how a dog had done what no alarm system, no vibrating bracelet, no camera could. He had felt the emergency. And he had acted. A week later, Lena stood in front of a small group of parents at a community center, all of them raising children while navigating the silence of deafness. Echo sat beside her. She placed her hand on his head. This is Echo, she said. He wasn't trained the way most dogs are. He didn't pass the tests. But he passed the one that mattered. She looked around the room. Some held babies. Others held tissues. And if you've ever doubted yourself, like I have, I want you to remember this. Sometimes the world doesn't need perfect training. It needs perfect love. Echo wagged his tail. The crowd stood to clap. And in the back of the room, a young woman with a hearing aid turned to her partner and whispered, "I want a dog like that." The waiting room lights were too bright. Lena sat hunched in the stiff hospital chair, Emily resting against her chest, her tiny body finally calm again. The smell of antiseptic clung to everything, her clothes, her skin, her memory. But Lena couldn't feel any of it. She was too busy watching Echo. The black Labrador sat motionless by the door, head slightly tilted, his ears perked toward every sound. Occasionally, his eyes darted to Emily, then back to the hallway. As if he still wasn't ready to rest. As if part of him feared it wasn't really over. A soft knock on the glass brought Lena's attention up. Dr. Reyes entered, the pediatric specialist who had overseen Emily's emergency treatment. He was young, composed, but tonight his eyes were weighed with something heavy. He sat down across from her and gave a kind smile. Lena adjusted Emily in her arms, then tapped the small speaker on her phone screen. The speech-to-text app blinked, ready to listen. Dr. Reyes began, slowly and clearly. "She's going to be okay. Her oxygen levels are strong, and the scan shows no damage. Her lungs are clear now." Lena let out a breath. She hadn't even realized she was holding it. "She'll need monitoring for a few nights," he continued, "but she's lucky." He paused. A flicker of something else passed across his face. "No," he corrected himself. "She's more than lucky." Lena looked at him, curious. He leaned forward slightly, as if what he was about to say didn't belong in a medical file. "You came in at 2:03 a.m. She was cyanotic, lips blue, pulse fading. We had 90 seconds, maybe 2 minutes, before she would have suffered cardiac arrest." He let that sink in. 2 minutes, he repeated. That's all that stood between her and a completely different outcome. Lena blinked, the words hitting like thunder behind her ribs. 2 minutes. Her stomach twisted. And then her eyes shifted toward Echo. He was still by the door, unmoving, but now his gaze was on her. Watching her. Waiting. She spoke aloud, lips slow and clear. "I wouldn't have known. I didn't hear anything. No cough. No cry." The app transcribed it all, and Dr. Reyes nodded gently. "But he did," he said, gesturing to Echo. "You told the nurse it was your dog who warned you." Lena nodded slowly, her throat tightening. Dr. Reyes smiled again, this time softer, more amazed than clinical. Echo patted over and rested his chin on her knee, looking up with those dark, soulful eyes. She cupped his face, her forehead pressed against his. "You should know. I've seen trained medical dogs respond to seizures, diabetic crashes, even fainting spells. But your dog acted on instinct. He's not just a hearing dog. He's emotionally bonded." He looked Echo over. "That's not training," he said. "That's love." Lena's lips trembled. She held Emily closer and whispered, "They told me he was too emotional." She remembered the file again. The warnings. The trainers who had said he couldn't be trusted with someone like her. Too reactive. Too sensitive. Too attached. But tonight, those flaws had saved a life. Dr. Reyes stood and gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "I see a lot of tragedy in this room," he said. "But tonight, your story will stay with me. Thank you for sharing him with the world." And with that he left. Lena sat frozen. The silence returned, but this time it wasn't hollow. It was sacred. She looked down at Emily. Then back at Echo. Finally, she beckoned to him. "No one else heard her," she whispered. "But you did. You always do." He licked her hand, just once, and closed his eyes. That night, she didn't sleep. Instead, she wrote. Not just a blog post this time, but a full story. She detailed everything. How Echo came to her. The bond. The doubts. The moment she had once cried on the kitchen floor, afraid of her own silence. And how Echo had been the only one to offer reassurance. She posted it with a photo, Echo curled around Emily's hospital bed, one paw over her blanket, protective and still. By morning, it had over 4 million views. Her inbox was overflowing. Offers from TV shows. Interviews. Magazine features. But none of that mattered to Lena. What mattered was that people were finally seeing dogs like Echo for what they truly were, not just animals. Not even just helpers. But hearts. Hearts on 4 legs. That evening, Lena held a live stream for other deaf parents. Hundreds joined. She didn't use a script. She didn't try to be perfect. She just signed and spoke from the place inside her that had been cracked wide open. I used to think I needed to be fixed, she said, hands steady. That something about being deaf made me less capable. Less of a mother. I feared the moment I wouldn't hear her cry. She looked down at Echo, who sat beside her chair. But I didn't need fixing. I just needed him. People in the chat began typing. I'm crying. Where do we get dogs like Echo? Thank you for sharing this. You saved more than just your baby. Then came the final comment that made Lena's heart seize. It simply read, maybe we're all just looking for someone who hears us when no one else does. She closed her laptop, turned to Echo, and for the first time in her life, she felt truly heard. 6 months later, Echo stood at the center of a brightly lit auditorium. The seats were packed with families, deaf parents, children, service dog trainers, reporters, everyone watching as Lena walked slowly onto the stage, cradling baby Emily in one arm and holding Echo's leash in the other. But tonight, he didn't need guiding. He led the way. A soft spotlight warmed them as Lena stepped up to the microphone, adjusted the small tablet that transcribed her speech live, and smiled. She wore a pale blue blouse, the same one she had worn the night she brought Echo home. This, she signed and spoke softly, is the dog they said was too emotional. The audience smiled. This is the dog I didn't choose. He chose me. When I didn't believe I could be a mother, he believed first. Echo sat beside her, calm, composed. Still listening, always listening. Lena continued. I was afraid of the silence. Afraid that one day my child would need me, and I wouldn't hear her. I asked, what if I can't protect her? She paused. And Echo answered. Behind her, a screen lit up with a photo, the same one that had gone viral. Echo curled beside Emily's hospital bed, his paw draped protectively over her tiny body. People in the room blinked away tears. He didn't just save my baby, Lena said. He saved my belief in myself. He reminded the world that being different isn't broken, and that sometimes the softest hearts hear what the loudest ones miss. The room rose in applause. That night, Echo was awarded an honorary medal by the National Hearing Dog Association, the first dog ever to receive one for emotional intuition. Lena was flooded with messages, not of sympathy, but of hope. One came from a father in Scotland, expecting his first child. After watching Lena's story, he adopted a retired service dog named Bailey. Another came from a woman in Brazil. Her daughter had epilepsy. She wrote, I didn't think I deserved help. Now I believe I do. But the most touching came weeks later, a handwritten letter. Your story didn't just show the power of dogs. It showed the power of not giving up on what others call too much. Echo wasn't too emotional. He was exactly what the world needed. Lena read that letter aloud to Echo as he lay beside her on the couch, Emily asleep on her lap. She looked down at him, scratched behind his ear, and whispered, You were never too much. You were always just enough. Echo wagged his tail once, slow and steady, then laid his head on her knee. The world outside buzzed with noise. Cars. People. Sirens. But inside that room, there was only peace. And somewhere in the stillness, between heartbeats and breaths, a dog listened not with ears, but with love. If Echo's story touched your heart, take a moment to share it. Someone out there might need this reminder today. And if you believe in second chances and the silent heroes among us, don't forget to like, subscribe, and tell us in the comments. What moment moved you the most?